Okay, so we're a couple minutes after 10 o'clock on the West Coast, 1 o'clock on the East Coast. So we'll get this kicked off, and as more people join, they'll be able to come into the presentation. Again, welcome. It's our virtual training session. It's probably our fifth or sixth in a series, and we have a few more coming up. This one's on consumer product testing and compliance. Really focus on consumer products and both large and small. Um, my name is Don Milstein. I'm president of Vitrek, and the main presenter today will be Chad Clark, our vice president of sales.
Hello, everyone.
There we go, Chad.
My name's
welcome.
Chad. Don's going to handle this first section, and I will jump in shortly. And but let's let Don kick everything off.
Yep. So on the next slide should be our contact information. And this presentation will be emailed to everyone after the session, so you don't have to feel pressure to take notes as you're going, obviously do, but you will get this presentation in full at the end of the session. Again, Chad's email address is there along with mine. Just some quick ground rules just to make the presentation go well. We appreciate if you mute your microphones during the presentation. Once we'll have periodic breaks that'll look just like this every couple screens, every 5 or 6 screens at good stopping points. At that point, you can unmute your microphone if you have a question, but all along, we'd really appreciate if you use the chat feature. Go ahead, ask questions as I'm presenting or Chad's presenting. We will have people monitoring those chat questions. We'll answer those, and then we'll kind of repeat it at the session. So please feel to make it interactive as much as possible. We have a decent sized crowd today, so it's a little hard to just keep the phones on off mute. But definitely use the chat feature and we'll go from there. And again, like I said, this will be sent to you, so enjoy. We're going to probably turn off the cameras. You can see that we all got dressed for this session, and haircut's not too bad, but just want to make sure everyone can see us, but it gets a little distracting. So with that, we'll go ahead and kick this off. So what I'm going to do is just give you a kind of a quick overview on Vitrek, just so you understand where we're coming from and our expertise in this industry. Vitrek's been in the industry for over 30 years, full host of products in both test and measurement, products of various different sizes and shapes and types, which we'll go over. We're headquartered in San Diego, California, so all the manufacturing is done there, engineering, customer service, sales support, so it truly makes the product American-made. Yet we are an international company. We have sales representatives in over 30 countries. We sell throughout the world. So we truly view our product and our efforts internationally, as well as, and part of this discussion, you'll see that we track those international standards. So if everyone could just keep your phone on mute, we'd appreciate it. As far as our product lines, we'll cover some of these as we go through. The HIPOT electrical safety testers, which is one of the focuses of this presentation. We do a lot in the cable test systems, power analyzers, high voltage meters, DC loads. And our facility itself is ISO 17025 accredited calibration lab. So as products go out the door, they're calibrated to these standards, as well as if you send them back in a year later for calibration, we can do it, or obviously you can take it to local. But just helps you understand not only are we American made, we come up to those standard levels and make sure our facility meets the ISO accreditation. As far as the industries we serve, it's kind of a broad market. A lot of focus on the semiconductor manufacturers, medical, aerospace, defense, and you can see a whole host of others, electrical, and obviously consumer appliances. One thing I really want to just throw out there, when this whole COVID epidemic hit, our team in California, we quickly went home when the state said go home. We basically had 24 hours notice. But within a week, we really reorganized to have people working remotely where possible, but also get our production people back in there as our customers are in that critical infrastructure, we've got letters and emails from various customers in the defense and aerospace and medical saying, hey, we're critical, you need to be up and running, we need your support. And I'm proud of our team was able to do that. And we've been up and running from a manufacturing standpoint this entire time. So just want to kind of highlight that. When we talk about the different customers, it's really the next slide there, really covers a broad group, right? So on the consumer product side, obviously it's appliances, both large like refrigerators from Sub-Zero or GE toasters, computers, and printers, that kind of thing, which is part of the focus of this presentation. We're strong in the commercial and industrial side, whether it's the big electrical manufacturers of Siemens, Square D, those type of guys, Eaton, but also the healthcare, Philips and others, and like we mentioned before, the aerospace side. And then you look at the green area, green and sustainability, that's been a big growth, obviously from their electrical usage and high demands of power usage and conversion. So we've done a lot in the electric vehicles with companies like Tesla in the lighting area. Solar power has been a big area. So we're really proud of our efforts there. And then overall, it's in the test and compliance side. We'll cover a lot of that here, but our direct customers tend to be the labs across the country, let alone international, such as UL and Lawrence Berkeley Labs. We've done a lot with the federal government, their own labs. And then throughout in so many countries, our products are the standard in their labs. So a broad base of customers, which hopefully a lot of you are on the phone today. And I just want to finalize here, just a quick high level, on the HIPOT testers, which Chad will go in much more depth. Ideal products for testing both in the R&D lab as well as on the manufacturing floor as products come down, and make sure they're not leaking electricity and protections against shock. We sell a whole line of power analyzers, ideal for energy efficiency and electrical power efficiency calculations and research, both in the R&D and also in the production floor. Very high accuracy and speed of calculations, resolution. It's really an industry leader at the top end. We have a high voltage meter, which is truly world class for the laboratory area and for testing of high voltages of all types. And like I said, many countries can use that throughout. And then the DC load market, newer product for us on the DC load side for testing all kind of products, power supplies, batteries, etc., and covering the whole gamut: voltage, current, power, and resistance. So it's our family of product, and what you can see from over 30 years experience diving into all these 4 product areas, serving all those customer base, I think positions us well to present on all these various topics. And today in particular, we'll cover consumer appliances. So with that, I'm going to kind of switch it over to Chad. If anybody's got a question, we'll answer it. If not, we'll get this kicked off, and then we'll come back around for the chat questions at the next break. All right, Chad, all you.
All right, guys. I did see Russell's question here about semi and photovoltaic applications. I'm not going to be specifically addressing photovoltaics, but as far as the testing of them, it's fairly straightforward, except you do have to submerge the product because it is kind of a class 2 installation. But Russell, I'm more than happy to answer those directly for you. So thanks for joining. Again, my name is Chad Clark. Don, thanks for the intro there. Let's go ahead and get started. So I imagine that all of you are here today because you probably manufacture, test, maybe even sell a product, and you want it to have one of these logos. So it's a little bit complicated, but basically we have nationally recognized testing labs all over the United States and all over the world, and there's a whole variety of them. And what they really do is they validate your products and make sure that you're compliant with a IEC, ISO standard, a UL standard, something like that, that is specific to the product category that you're manufacturing under. So there are hundreds of different categories, and they're very specific. There might be some that are specific towards photovoltaics, battery-powered devices, high power, handheld, all kinds of different things. So, you really need to get involved in this at the beginning of the design stage and find out what product segment your product is going to end up in. And then you would reach out to one of these labs, and I recommend getting involved with them, from the beginning. It could definitely save some redesign, some cost, and some heartache down the road. So, what does it mean to be compliant with the standard? Our products cover a important aspect of the compliance, but it's certainly not everything. You can see here this is a limited list, but a fairly thorough list of what you need to actually get that mark on your product. Not only does it have to be electrically safe, it can't be sharp. It has to have proper balance. You need to have, it can't get too hot. You need to have specific creepage and clearances throughout. There's regulations on RF emissions, all kinds of things like that. The way you mark your products, making sure that you have power switches, your grounds, safety labels all in the correct locations. They need to be the correct colors, the correct sizes, everything like that. So it's very complicated. If you've never gone through the process with a product, it's challenging to say the least. We're here to support you, specifically when it comes to the electrical compliance section. And that might only be one section out of 10 sections in a particular standard. So definitely purchase those standards early in the process. And although they're not fun to read, go ahead and read them. So we have used Vitrek products to list, I should say Vitrek testers, with a variety of customers. Since this is kind of geared towards consumer products, these are some of our consumer product customers here. They vary in high power applications, two-phase 240 kind of stuff, down to regular double insulated things that might only draw 50 watts or less, including some DC applications. So it's fairly broad, and I'll give you some examples of who uses our products and why. So everyone's familiar with Hewlett-Packard. They're actually one of our really first major customers back in the 90s. We got involved in some of their automated testing on their computer production lines and printer production lines with an early product, which was the 944i. It was really one of the first basically 4-in-1 fully automated tester. Now they're using the V7X and the 964 in multi-point test applications. But any of these consumer products, it's very important that they are listed, that you have traceability, that they've been tested. It's one thing to release a product to be used by other professionals where there's a little bit higher level of expectation from the user, from an education standpoint and experience standpoint. But when you're throwing it up for grabs to the general public, as a manufacturer, you can be held to a higher level of liability. So, like what I was saying before, we also use our products where it's going to be high power applications. Refrigeration and heating, you're going to have big turn-on surges with those compressors. Electrical heating elements are going to, although they are purely resistive, they're going to have large power demands. In those situations, sometimes we'll use a product like the 952 that has a little bit more power, a little bit higher ground bond current to make sure that you can properly test higher power devices. And then on the other side of the consumer products would be things that might be a little bit less power, 1,000 watts and less. And we're kind of on the fringe of some of these, but it's definitely a valid category also for us. All right, so coming back to it, does your product need to have one of these labels, a CSA, UL, maybe the CE mark if you're shipping a product into the EU? And the answer is usually yes. At minimum, you're going to want a CE mark. If it's a consumer product, it's going to need to be listed through one of those NRTLs. If you're doing anything above, any decent production at all, it's definitely something you want to go ahead and do. All right, so there's different classifications. So not only are you going to have to figure out what product segment and what standard you apply to, you also need to look at whether you're a class 1, 2, or even 3 type product, because that's going to be broken out within the standard, and you will be testing your product differently, manufacturing it differently based on the construction method. So class 1 is obviously something we're familiar with. It's typically going to have here in North America like a NEMA 515 power cord on it. You're going to have a line, a neutral, and then a redundant ground. That ground is going to be connected to the metal chassis of the product, and that is going to keep you isolated from line and neutral, and then also protected by shunting any current to ground, not through the operator, who's going to have a little bit higher resistance than that, or I should say a lot higher resistance than that path to ground. So the other very common category you guys are familiar with, I'm sure, would be a class 2. That's something that's double insulated. It's going to have a two conductor power cord, just line and neutral, 2 blades. These are going to be, blow dryers, blenders, things like that. Pretty much anything that's handheld is going to fall in the class 2 category. A lot of plastics are used these days, a lot of overmolding, things like that. Class 3 is something that we don't really get involved in testing very often because it kind of falls under the testing guidelines. Typically, your skin's going to insulate up to about 30 volts. Products are less than that, and they have a limited power supply. They're pretty much deemed safe. And you're not going to see them tested at a production level very often with a HIPOT tester. Although at the sub-assembly level, it's quite common. All right, so this is one of the most common standards, 60335. It often requires you to have a 500 VA output transformer. That's something that really confuses a lot of people. They're like, if my product is tested at 1,000 volts and only draws 5 milliamps, 50 VA, why would I need a 500 VA output rating? And that's kind of a legacy standard. So the concern is that early HIPOT testers only measured the output on the primary side of the transformer. So if you didn't have a large enough power output, you could collapse that output and there would be no way to verify that you were getting the proper test voltage at the DOT. So that's kind of a holdover portion of the standard there. And oftentimes there's workarounds for that if you don't want to use a 500 VA rated piece of equipment. But we do offer those. The majority of these products are going to be tested at under 2,000 volts. All of our testers do that. You're going to have dwell times anywhere from 1 second to 60 seconds, and then ground bond up to 40 amps. Typically, you're going to be limited to about 150 milliohms of resistance in between that earth ground pin and chassis in a class 1 device. All right, so this is a luminary standard here. Voltages can be a little bit higher for luminaries. These tend to be class 1, where you're going to be also doing a ground bond test. Certainly in production and type testing for production, sometimes only a ground continuity, depending on your power levels. Once again, you're going to see everything's very similar. They're going to specify ramp time, dwell times, leakage current, either in milliamps, or some of the standards will say the product should not break down. Especially in the V7X, we do have a setting that is breakdown only. We do not require the user to set a window of leakage current to pass a test. All right, so what is HIPOT testing? I mean, obviously everyone knows that you need it. I guess the question is why. So anytime that you have, a conductor, or I should say two conductors separated by an insulator, you run into a situation where you might want to verify the quality of that insulation. So typically what you're going to do in a HIPOT test is you're going to hit it with significantly more voltage than it's going to see during regular use. Roughly 10 times. It's usually 2 times the voltage plus 1,000. And you're going to make sure that a breakdown doesn't occur or there isn't an excessive amount of leakage current. And this can be applied all over the place, from a cable or harness, a subassembly, a printed circuit board, or in this case, a finished product. So the other major component here is ground bond testing or ground continuity testing. They're very similar in the way that they work. What you're trying to do is verify that you have a low resistance path from your earth ground pin to your to the chassis of your product. In the event that you had mains break down to the chassis, you want the current path to be of low resistance, so all of that current can return back and trip a circuit breaker. For ground bond, you're typically going to be in the 10 to 40 amp range. Normally, your requirement's going to be 150 milliohms or less. Those resistances can be a little bit higher if you're just required to do a continuity test. But either way, it's the same. There's going to be current sourced, and then we're going to measure the voltage drop across your device. Convert that over to ohms, and that is going to be your pass or fail criteria. So do you have any questions at this point? Feel free to unmute yourself or continue to ask anything in the chat. All right, so we're going to jump into some of the products here. So the V7X, this is one of our most popular products. It's a very easy to use, friendly product. It has a touch screen interface. It doesn't have a fan. It's one of its best applications is dirty manufacturing environments. One of the biggest issues you can have with a high voltage product is to have a forced air product that kind of gets everything gummy and dirty inside the unit and really can affect our performance over time. It's important that you keep these things clean on the inside. V7X does not have that issue at all. It's going to output 5 kV AC and DC, which is more than enough for any of the segments here. It's a very fast and accurate and reliable tester. It's highly configurable. There's 7 different versions of it, anywhere from AC only with continuity to AC DC insulation resistance and ground bond, all in the same product. If you're buying one of these in the early stages of design, I highly recommend going with the V74. That way you're going to have more testing options that are going to let you qualify your products and actually make sure that you're complying with these standards before you get to your production test. So our other product family is the 95X. This product is more powerful, more accurate, and has a wider output voltage range. We can go to 15 kV DC, 30 kV AC. It's the most accurate tester, or as far as a HIPOT tester, that I'm aware of anyway, with 100 picoamp resolution. A lot of people will say, why would I need 100 picoamp resolution when my standard calls out for 5 milliamps? That seems like total overkill. And the answer is because sometimes you want to know these subtle differences, especially when you're trying to qualify new components, maybe changing line filters, changing printed circuit boards within the unit. And you want to be able to see these small differences. Did you just make your product better, worse, or was there no change? And with a less accurate product, you can definitely do the go, no-go testing, but you might not have the visibility into your product, and you might not find out that you have a serious issue until it's too late, and when you have an entire batch that's failing. And no one wants to be in that situation. So an extension to any of our HIPOT testers is the 964i switch. This can be fitted with high voltage or high current relays. And it's great for either multi-product test applications in a situation where someone, let's say they have a 60-second test, and you don't really want the operator to have to sit around for 60 seconds, between products they hook up. So you could hook up, I don't know, 10 products, 20 products to a 964, press the start button and walk away and come back at the, and that operator could go be productive for 10, 15 minutes, and then come back to a batch of products, switch those out to the next batch, press the button, and then go be productive again. Not only does it let someone do that, if you have a complicated device, maybe you have, DC and mains all within one product that needs to be isolated, we can have different nodes tested at different voltages, all automatically, all with traceability. And if you use our software, you can have that keyed to a serial number of your device and traceability, which is very important. Any more questions here before we continue? All right, so now we're going to kind of get into the procedure of things. First choice, you're going to have to use AC or DC for your test. Typically, mains products are tested with AC. There are exceptions for high capacitive products, and you can usually test with DC at the peak of the AC, which is roughly 1.4 times. Oftentimes that's 2,100 or 120 volts. There's some debate whether DC is safer or it might damage your installation more. In a short-term test, a short production test, I don't think you're going to have any issues using AC or DC. Either one can be valid. All right, so we're coming back to what we talked about earlier, which is class 1 versus class 2 installation. And there's a very different way in how these products are tested. Class 1's going to be the easiest. You have this metal chassis, which is isolating the operator from the product and maintaining connection to ground. In that case, it's really straightforward. You're going to connect line and neutral to our high voltage output. The return is going to go to chassis, and then you're going to have, the return would typically go to earth, and then you're going to have the continuity sense plus lead going to chassis. Very straightforward to hook up. Where it gets much more complicated is when you have that double insulated product. Now the user is potentially the path to ground. So you have to replicate, where the user could touch. Sometimes this means wrapping it in foil, submerging it in water. With a photovoltaic panel, it's pretty standard to put the whole thing in a dunk tank, except for the leads. You're going to put high voltage on those leads and make sure that you're not getting any leakage into the water. That's usually has some soap or something added to it to make it a little more conductive. So it's a little bit more complicated. The fixturing is a little bit more complicated, and every application is going to be a little bit different. It's a little harder for us to provide a out-of-the-box solution for class 2 products. Here's an image here on how ground bond's going to work on your DUT. Once again, everything's going to be a little bit different. But the thing to remember here is that what we're doing is we're supplying a current, and we're measuring that voltage drop across your DUT. And with the tester, you're going to be setting up parameters, and your product must fall into that window to pass. All right, so there's at least 4 ways you can fail. If you've set a leakage current limit, you could simply exceed that limit. That limit could be 5 milliamps and your product could be 6 milliamps. If that's the case, It's not necessarily the end of the world. You might have to look at why. It could just be a capacitive issue or resistive, which might be acceptable. If you're using breakdown only, which is a feature that's standard in the V7X, there's a couple things there. Once again, your product could be breaking down, or your product could be drawing more current than we have set up around our breakdown only test. So definitely check with us if you're seeing that. You could have arcing. Depending on the sensitivity that you set your arc circuit to, you may or may not fail on that arc. And then corona is another issue also. You're really not going to see it as bad at the voltages in this consumer product kind of category, but once you start getting above 2000 volts, it can become an issue, and it could certainly make the difference on a pass or fail. Any questions? Aside from the ones that are in the chat, it sounds like the ones that are in the chat are being handled, so we'll continue. This section is going to be a little bit about, user safety. So the most important thing is that your user is aware of the product, how to use it. They've been trained on it. The number one mistake that I see out there with people is that the user, it's either not documented properly or they forget to turn the product on. If you have a hard power switch on your product and you don't turn the product on, all you're doing is HIPOT testing the power switch, which is great, but hopefully your auditor would catch that and you're certainly not performing a valid test. It's very important to make sure that the tester is functioning properly. Most people are going to send their products in annually for calibration, and it's going to be verified that they are outputting the proper voltage, able to measure current. What if your product happened to break on shipping, being returned from from your calibration lab, and you went ahead and tested products for a whole year and thought everything was great and you were passing, but you weren't outputting? There could be a situation where a failure like that could occur, and that's why we want to do a more frequent verification, which we'll talk about a little bit later. So you definitely only want properly trained operators in the area. Usually when there's issues, it's people that either might be walking by, touching things, kind of curious, and are not the operators that are using the units on a daily basis. Never touch the device or the test leads during the test. It's an unnecessary risk. Use an enclosure where it's possible. Be consistent in your test setup and your conditions, things like that. We'll leave this list here for you guys if you want to reference it later, and we will be emailing out this PowerPoint. So this is kind of a typical situation. You're going to have the DUT there on the left. The operator, in this case, doesn't have an enclosure. They're using those palm switches that are connected to the interlock to make sure that they have their hands away from the device, and that remote start stop foot switch would actually turn the unit on. This works great when you have a short test, maybe a 1 second test. In a 60-second test, it would absolutely be torture to make the person sit there with their hands on the palm switches for a minute. So depending on your test time, criteria, your DUT, you really need to look at your workstation and design it around that. In that 60-second test situation, definitely go with an enclosure. It is by far the easiest. The lid here in the enclosure has a micro switch on it that's connected to our interlock. If the lid opened during a test, we would abort. If they tried to start a test with the lid being open, we wouldn't even start. So this is my favorite way to protect an operator. But once again, there's nothing better than an experienced and trained personnel. So connection. So if you are class 1, this is the way to go right here. So what we're doing is we're breaking out, what would be our output terminals into, this is kind of a world power adapter. It works great with the NEMA 515 connectors and some other international cords. What this is going to do is apply high voltage to line in neutral. It's going to give you easy connection to your earth ground pin. Nobody wants to be putting alligator clips on these, jumping power cords together, things like that. High voltage is no place to have wire nuts and electrical tape or some heat shrink, trying to protect you. I highly recommend buying one of these pre-manufactured boxes. Not only does it reduce your risk, it just makes it so much easier to use. Once again, this is the same thing, but this is the NEMA 515 only. Certainly works better if you're only going to be testing the NEMA 515 connector. And we make this available for a variety of things, like the IEC 320 connector. It looks like a little doghouse, C15, I believe. You might see that on a computer server or something like that. And we do have leads that are terminated with that. We always recommend using them. If you have a product where maybe you don't have a cord on it, or pigtail wires that are easy to use, you might have to use something like this test pistol. It's relatively safe until you pull that trigger, and then you're going to have an exposed metal probe that extends out. But for some applications like printed circuit boards or sub-assemblies, it's necessary to use something like this. Does anyone have any questions about making connection to their device? All right, and let's get into some traceability here. This is, you put all this effort into designing the product, testing it. Now, what do you want to do? You pretty much have two options. You can put a sticker on it. You can just ship it. You could write down the serial number. But we have some other solutions that we recommend. So the first thing, and we talked about this earlier, is calibration and verification. So most people are going to have a little binder, something like that, where they keep everything associated with their product. So it's going to be their CalCert, their procedure, maybe a log of verification. At the beginning of a shift, people are going to connect a verification device, run that test, make sure that it works, and sign off on it. A lot of the times it kind of looks like that, the bathroom cleaning log you might see in a restaurant, very similar to that. And that does provide traceability. If your auditor comes in, they can look back at it and see that it has been checked on a daily basis, and they really want to see you making an effort to provide some traceability. So that daily verification, in a lot of the UL standards, they will call out for using a 120k ohm resistor, and it should fail if you connect a 120k ohm resistor, which works. It's fine. What we like to do is take it one step further. So the APVD, which is an extension of the self-test for the V7X, basically would disconnect your test leads, plug this in, run the APVD test. And it's a known resistance value for both HIPOT insulation resistance and ground bond. We're going to check that at a variety of voltages, verifying the current, from as low as a few hundred volts up to, I believe, 3,500 in that product. And what it does is it makes sure that we can distinguish a good product from a bad product, that we can fail a bad DUT and pass a good DUT. And at the end of the day, that's what the auditors want to see. And this is where things get a little bit more complicated. It doesn't always make sense to disconnect your test leads and plug in the APVD. You might have your product in a rack and a fixture, and it's just not really practical. And it's also a good process to test those test leads on a regular basis. So we do offer some custom verification devices. This one would be to replace a product with an IEC connector on it. You would plug in our TL IEC into the port there in the upper left-hand corner, connect your ground bond lead, and go ahead and run your test. Once again, it should be able to pass a good device, fail a bad device, and that's what they want to hear. So to take it one step further, we recommend using software and a database to store all these records. If you choose to use our QuickTest Enterprise software, you're going to have the ability to have a log of every serial number that you've tested. This can be entered manually or with a barcode scanner. Date, time, the user. You can see what the test limits were and whether it passed or failed. Eventually, you're going to be able to build an entire database, and you could use it for analysis. You could look back and say, you know, does this operator have more failures? Are they running more products through this line versus that line? And it's really a very useful tool for a manufacturer. Next week, we're actually doing a webinar on this product. I highly recommend you guys take a look at it if you're still, you know, using a handwritten log or no log at all. So we'll be sending out information to you guys later this week and a link to that webinar. Does anyone else have any questions? If you do, please email myself, chad@vitrek.com. You can send it into sales@vitrek.com or reach out to Bob and Glenn directly, and we're more than happy to answer those questions for you. I want to kind of thank everyone for tuning in today. I appreciate your time, and I hope that you found some value in this presentation.
Very good, Chad. Thank you for presenting. And like we said, everyone will get a copy of this presentation. And please let us help you out with any of your projects. Feel free to shoot Chad or anyone on the team a email. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you very much.
Bye, guys.